Good evening, and welcome to the debate between John Avlon and Nick Lalota, the candidates who are running to represent the 1st Congressional District in the House of Representatives of the United States Congress. The League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and North Fork is pleased to be co-sponsoring this debate with the leagues from Brookhaven, Huntington, and Smithtown. I'm Estelle Gelman from the League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork, and I will be moderating this debate. The other member of the League whom you will see on screen is Eileen Mercer, who is our timer. Others in the League involved with bringing you this debate are Arlene Hinkemeyer, who is our publicity chairperson and served as liaison with CTV, and our Voter Services Committee, chaired by Neil Cohen. Our thanks go to all those who contributed questions for the debate, and a very special thanks to the staff at CTV, whose technical support has made it possible to view this debate on YouTube. We also thank the candidates for participating, and we thank you for watching. Just a quick word about the League of Women Voters. The League is a political but nonpartisan national organization. While we never endorse parties or candidates, we do take positions and advocate for issues affecting our community. Foremost among our goals is to educate voters, stimulate voter interest, and encourage voter participation. We are respected for sponsoring fair and impartial candidate debates, such as this one, and for the educational materials we distribute on voting issues. Now, to move on to the ground rules for this debate. Since we don't have a live audience before us, the questions were all submitted in advance by members of the community and the League, and they have been vetted to ensure that they are appropriate for this debate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, up to 2 minutes to respond to each question, and 1 minute for a closing statement. In addition, each candidate will have the opportunity for one 1-minute rebuttal to each of his opponent's responses. The candidates will speak in alphabetical order, and John Avlon will be giving his opening statement first. He will also answer the first question first, after which the first response to each question will be rotated between the candidates. John Avlon will now give his opening statement.
Thank you, Estelle, and thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you for your commitment to civil and substantive civic conversation that helps make our democracy better. I'm John Avlon. I'm a native New Yorker, grandson of immigrants, a husband and a father. I'm not a partisan political guy. I've been a journalist, an author. I write history books on the side, most recently about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I've run a news organization. And so I understand that side of life. And I think it's healthy for folks to bring their experiences to bear when it comes time to enter public service, which I think should be done for a stage of our life. And this is one of those times in our history where I think all folks are being called on to step up, because I think this is a critical moment. I think our democracy is in danger. But I really do approach this from thinking about putting country over party. You know, I'm a common sense Democrat, but I've worked for Democrats and Republicans. I don't dislike Republicans. I'm married to a Republican. But I did work for the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, during 9/11. I was his chief speechwriter, and my team and I were responsible for writing the eulogies for 343 firefighters and 37 Port Authority police officers and 23 members of the NYPD. And that is a formative moment in my life. It shapes who I am and how I see the world. And when I think about that act of heroism where they ran into the fire to save their fellow citizens, I am deeply motivated and moved by the fact and the idea that they didn't die to see our nation tear itself apart 2 decades later. But that's where we are. We're more divided than we should be. We're more divided than our political debates than we are, in fact, are. And so the stakes for the country and our community cannot be higher. But we need to come together again. And I think that's the opportunity of this election. I've said from the beginning that I'm committed to building a broad, patriotic, bipartisan coalition to defend American democracy and to make sure that government is delivering again, reasoning together again in a spirit of common sense problem solving. My campaign is focused on the idea of rebuilding the middle of our politics and rebuilding the middle of our economy, because I believe those two things are directly connected. Together, I think we can address the affordability crisis.
Okay, there's the end.
Well, I can't see the time, so if you throw that up. We can address the affordability crisis by restoring the state and local tax deduction that Trump and the Republicans took away. We can defend reproductive freedom.
Just finish that sentence.
Well, I can't see the time, so I'd like to
just finish the sentence.
Thank you,
and
Estelle.
don't do a run on.
Can you see me,
I
John?
couldn't until then, so that's my problem. I'm going to need to change my gallery mode, but
Okay, because all four of us should be on the screen.
Yeah, you weren't, so my apologies.
Oh.
I couldn't see the cue.
All right.
Thank
Sorry.
you. I see it now. All right.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Nick LaLota will now give his opening statement.
Good evening. I'm Nick LaLota, Congressman for New York's 1st District. But truth be told, the greatest job I ever had was being a young naval officer stationed on ships overseas, leading our nation's finest and selfless young men and women. I come from a family of service. My dad was a cop. Both of my grandfathers were cops. My stepdad was a Navy man. My brother served in the Marines. And after St. Anthony's High School, I graduated from the Naval Academy and served 11 years in a Navy uniform. And it's with that perspective of service that I approach my role in Congress. There, I'm proud to serve on the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security and Small Business Committees, where I have fought successfully for our nation's security, safety, and affordability. I'm a common sense conservative who believes in lower taxes, more freedom, and more personal accountability. I'm also a pragmatist, and I think that compromise is a good word in politics. And it is with that sense that I am ranked more bipartisan than 85% of Congress. And it's with that sense that I passed more bills than 95% of my colleagues in Congress, all with bipartisan support. Bills to help our economy, our safety, and our environment, both nationally and here on Long Island. In Congress, I'm a leader in the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, the Bipartisan Long Island Sound Caucus. And when a constituent calls my office looking for help at the VA, the IRS, or with a passport, we help them happily, regardless of their political ideology. And that's not a new thing. When I was elections commissioner here in Suffolk County from 2015 to 2021, the League of Women Voters and I would meet to talk about ideas which we differed, like voter ID. But our conversations were always thoughtful, considerate, and respectful. And with that, I want to thank the League for hosting tonight's debate, and I offer good luck to my opponent tonight.
Thank you. We will now begin the questions, and John Avlon will be the first to answer that first question. With the Dobbs decision, which now leaves the legality of abortion to the individual states, there are those who would like to see federal legislation banning the right to abortion nationwide, and others who would like to see federal legislation protecting the right to abortion. Where do you stand on this issue?
I stand strongly in favor of stopping any national abortion ban. I stand strongly to protect reproductive freedom, which every woman knows is under assault right now. I opposed the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It was 50 years of precedent. And the fact that my daughter has fewer rights than my mother is not the direction America is supposed to go. Good people can disagree, but I deeply believe that the decision to have an abortion should be between a woman, her doctor, and her God, not the government. I don't think any partisan bureaucrats should be making that most personal decision. And this is an area of deep disagreement between my opponent and myself. My opponent cheered the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He said it was a, quote, step in the right direction. And he said repeatedly that he would vote for a second or third trimester abortion ban. That is a 12-week abortion ban. We see the downstream effect of Dobbs. I see Nick is throwing something up, but the reality is he said that he supposes he would support a second trimester abortion ban. That is a 12-week ban. And that, I think, is totally outside the common sense standards for our district, which is 75% pro-choice, including a majority of Republicans. Women are dying. We're having debates about contraception and IVF and tracking women. I think that is the opposite of freedom. And I think we need to focus on what unites us, not what divides us. And I think this decision has been disastrous, and we need to pass the Women's Health Protection Act and make sure we stop a national abortion ban. And a vote for Republicans is a vote to empower extremism. And for people who've had a national abortion ban on the to-do list since the beginning. This is a fundamental issue in this election, and the differences between my opponent and I couldn't be more stark.
Thank you. Nick?
John Avlon can lie all he wants. He can put millions of dollars of ads behind his lies. It doesn't make them true. I oppose a national abortion ban. I'm for the exceptions of rape, incest, life of the mother. I do not support regulation in the first trimester. I'm married to a strong, independent woman. I'm the son of a strong woman who was a single mom for quite some time and raised my brother and me strong. I support strong, independent women, and they should be able to make that decision. And what that my opponent would choose to spend millions of dollars clipping a very small portion of a larger statement that I made that says that the power does belong to we the people. The voters of New York State can decide to elect assembly members and senators and governors who can help regulate this issue. That's where the power is. That's where the power ought to be. And New York State, a very blue state, we have the most liberal abortion laws, which allow for abortions up into the 40th week, does not require that a parent be notified about a pregnant kid in school or an abortion clinic where a kid shows up. None of that stuff happens here in New York, and the voters should be able to decide that. Now, my record is clear. There's a lot of rhetoric, and there's certainly a lot of lying going on by Mr. Avlon in this, but my record is clear. In the United States Congress, I blocked my own party's mifepristone bill, a House appropriations bill on agriculture that would have banned the mailing of mifepristone across state lines. I was one of about a dozen House Republicans to block that, consistent with the position I've had for quite some time. This is now a state's issue. The federal government ought not to interfere with it as well. That's my position. Avlon can lie all he wants, and he can scare folks up. Doesn't make it true. Thanks a bunch.
I'd like a rebuttal, obviously, Estelle.
1
Look,
minute.
Nick has been trying to scrub his record because he recognizes his position is unpopular. It is on the record both in video and his website. And I'll quote his website before he scrubbed it. He said, if called to vote on the issue, I would vote on limitations on abortion in the second and third trimester. That is a 12-week abortion ban. In your own words, you've called for repealing New York's own abortion law. You're on tape doing it. So just trying to muddy the waters, accusing people of speaking facts, of lying, doesn't take away the truth of your statements, your very consistent position on this issue. A 12-week abortion ban that you said you would vote for locally here in New York State or federally. Those are the facts from your website, no matter how much you try to scrub that record.
May I?
Yes.
So what's necessary, and your predecessor, whom I beat by 11 points, and I think you're headed towards a similar fate, sir, is that I have to choose to spend my resources to more and more address your lies. And it's unfortunate that you would try to use this as a wedge when I've been quite clear. I think it's extreme in New York on the parental notification thing in particular. I'm a parent of 3 awesome children. And if one of them ever winds up in a school nurse's office or an abortion clinic, I, as a parent, my wife as a parent, deserve the right to know that they're there. That law in New York does not prescribe that whatsoever. And I got the receipts here too, sir. I was one of 27 House Republicans to block that mifepristone. You can lie all you'd like, sir, but the reality is, and I'll give you a reality check. The reality is, in the Congress, I blocked extreme views on abortion. I'll do it again.
12-week abortion ban,
Thank
buddy.
you. No, no more. We're going on to the next question. And for this question, Nick, you will be first to answer. What measures would you support to strengthen border security and reform our immigration policies? Should it be reintroduced, would you support the bipartisan immigration bill? And if not, why and what changes might make it acceptable?
Great question. This is a topic of extreme concern of my constituents here in the 1st District. Let's understand how we got there, because you have to understand how we got here in order to address it. Soon after he took office, President Biden repealed 64 very effective Trump-era policies that were keeping our border secure. First and foremost was the Remain in Mexico policy. The policy said that if you came to America to seek asylum, you had to stay in Mexico while that claim was being adjudicated. When President Biden repealed Remain in Mexico, which he did by the stroke of a pen, himself did not ask Congress, did not ask anybody else. He repealed with a stroke of a pen. It was the green light to Central America, South America, and the whole world is just get to America's southwest border, claim asylum, whether it's true or not, and you'll be paroled into the country. Subsequently, we've had 222,000 fentanyl deaths, the leading cause of death of ages 18 to 45, 325,000 lost minor migrants, many towards human trafficking, and $5 billion of your New York State tax dollars going into the 5 boroughs for free healthcare, hotels for migrants. It's totally wrong. But House Republicans insist that President Biden or the next president reinstate those policies. But nevertheless, we passed H.R. 2 in May of 2023 before this all became political. And nevertheless, of course, the Senate didn't pass that, but we didn't stop there. We passed 12 individual bipartisan bills to give the Senate an opportunity to do something incremental on the issue. Your question at the end was about the Senate border bill, which is a surrender, not a solution, rejected even by independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema, because it allows 5,000 illegals per day into our country, gives billions of more dollars to sanctuary cities, and essentially codifies the Biden border crisis. A bill that my opponent supports, yet 4 nights ago conceded he'd never even read it. It's 100 pages, Mr. Avalon. Read the darn bill if you say you're going to support it. I don't want 5,000 more illegals coming into this country every day as a matter of law. That's why I rejected it.
Nick, you rejected it because yes.
No, but not yet.
Now,
Okay,
do I
John,
get
answer the question.
Thank you. Bipartisan border security bill was the best chance we had to deal with this problem. And the history here is very simple. Democrats and Republicans, beginning with George W. Bush, have supported a comprehensive immigration reform plan. That's what we need. But Republicans insisted on a standalone border security bill in exchange for aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel after the attacks of October 7th. Conservative Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma worked with Kyrsten Sinema and Chris Murphy on putting together a bill that the Wall Street Journal said was the toughest bipartisan border security bill any president could ever get. The Border Patrol Union supported it. It would have added 1,500 more Border Patrol agents, stopped the policy known as catch and release. It would have changed the adjudication of the asylum claims from 4 years, which is crazy, to 4 months. It would have added new technology to stop the flow of fentanyl into our country, and it would have cracked down even further on human trafficking. It had the support of Mitch McConnell. It had the middle 60 of the Senate. It was all set to pass with enormous support if it had gotten a bill in the House, and then Donald Trump pulled the plug, and Republicans like Nick LaLota took the knee. He went on Twitter and mocked this bill. He said, my 9-year-old could have done a better job negotiating this bill than James Lankford did. And I think that if you're willing to fearmonger off migrants and fundraise off those fears for political gain and refuse to fix it, that's a firing offense. I called Kyrsten Sinema's office because I've heard Nick LaLota say that she abandoned the bill. They say that is fundamentally false. That is a lie and a mischaracterization of her position. She believes it is a strong bill. It is the bill we need to pass. And so you're not telling the truth about that particular reference. And I got it directly from the source, sir. So that we need a bipartisan bill to pass, and his bill that he's talking about is not bipartisan. We need bipartisan bills to deal with the border crisis, which is serious, and then get comprehensive immigration reform so we can reunite as a nation and not cut ourselves off from the renewable resource that is legal immigration into our nation.
Thank you. Nick, is that up? Yes, I thought it was. Rebuttal.
4 nights ago at a Mill Island Civic Association meeting, a gentleman there totally stumbled Mr. Avalon when he asked, did you read the bill? John Avalon said, nope, never read the bill. He's taking his entire campaign, but more importantly, the lives of Americans who are dying from fentanyl, the lives of young migrants who are being lost in this country and likely human trafficked, and billions of dollars that are going into Manhattan and the boroughs for free hotels and healthcare for migrants. John Avalon read the DCCC's memo on this and believe that's not a good journalist to me. A good journalist, and I'll send it over to your office, Mr. Avalon. Here's the bill. I hope that you read it for the first time and you can understand why it's a surrender, not a solution. I was in Senator Sinema's office. I'm a leader in the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, and they asked us to go and talk about it. And the problem with the bill that I told the senator, and you can go Google it, it's back at home, Kyrsten Sinema border bill, and it says that she ran away from it, is because it had too many mays and not enough shalls. It gave President Biden, who has zero trust in the American public on the border, more authorities, not more requirements. To allow 5,000 illegals to cross the border today is an insane bill. You shouldn't have supported it.
You're done, Nick. So look, you're following the problem. If you were serious about solving the problem, you would have actually passed the bill that dealt with the issues you were concerned about. I have read the congressional research report on this. I know exactly what's in that bill, and it's a good bill. That's why the middle 60, including the Republican leadership, supported passing it. And Kristen Sinema's own office says you are fundamentally mischaracterizing her position. I want to solve the problem. You want to politicize it and take advantage of it. Some of us think bipartisanship's the solution. Other people think it's the problem. You're the latter. You followed Donald Trump's lead when he told you to kill the bill that would fix the border security. And I think that is the fundamental problem. We need to come together to solve this. I'd vote for that bill on day one.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the third question. And John, you will be answering first on this one.
Great.
The United States has been supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia for over 2 years. What is your position in regard to the United States continuing support of Ukraine? And what do you believe the role of the United States should be in resolving the situation?
I strongly believe we should support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. And I'm old enough to remember when Republicans believed in standing up to Russian aggression. The laws of history are really clear here. Bullies only respect strength. Weakness invites aggression. And multilateral security organizations like NATO are enormously effective at deterring totalitarian powers that are seeking to expand their turf. Stopping Vladimir Putin in Ukraine with the kind of support that the Biden administration has done while expanding NATO has been enormously effective. But Putin has made it very clear that the question of the fate of Ukraine is tied up with the results of this election. And that's why I think the return of Donald Trump would be so incredibly dangerous. He has said that Vladimir Putin can do whatever the hell he wants. He said that. He has consistently taken steps to weaken and undermine NATO, not for reasons of fiscal responsibility, but because it seems to be an obsession with him. I believe strongly that multilateral security organizations, particularly the ones that we founded with our allies after the Second World War, have helped keep the peace in an enormously successful fashion. And we need to reassert that bipartisan foreign policy tradition. I think there's a direct line between Harry Truman, the Cold War liberalism of JFK, Ronald Reagan, and the internationalists today. But instead, there's a whole code pink conservative neo-isolationist movement going on in the Republican Party. And when Republicans in the House let Ukraine twist in the wind for 6 months while they debated that border security bill. 6 months. And my opponent was silent during that time. I think we need to stand up with Ukraine. We need to stand up with our fellow democracies to stand up against tyrants and terrorists around the world. And because the defining struggle of our time is democracy versus autocracy, and Donald Trump keeps taking the side of autocrats, we need to be on the side of our fellow democracies with strength.
Thank you, Nick.
I love when John Avalon gets fired up about how long Congress takes to do things. Yeah, Congress takes a while to do things, but he seems to only get fired up about sending money to Ukraine. Never heard one peep about the U.S. Senate. Never passed any border security bills. House Republicans passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023, in May of 2023. Sat on the Senate's desk. Your friends in the Senate Democrats in the Senate never did anything about our own border security. And I've never heard one peep out of you, sir, about anything about that timeliness in that process. Yeah, I'm frustrated with how long Washington takes to do something. But never anything from you about our own border and what's happening to Americans within our own borders. Yeah, I voted for Ukraine supplemental. I ensured that we backed our ally against an adversary. Putin's an evil dictator. I get that. And you got the first line right. Weakness invites aggression. But let's talk about the weakness. 9 months before Putin invaded Ukraine, Biden relieved sanctions on Russia that allowed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to get built. 6 months before Putin invaded Ukraine, Biden had a terrible withdrawal from Afghanistan, bending to the Taliban. You don't talk about that. Those are the root catalysts that ensure that Putin's war machine gets fueled, that he can attack Ukraine. Those are the reasons. And until you get to those reasons, we can't just keep on sending tens and tens of billions. Yeah, it's necessary. I'd rather send money than young men and women over there. But unless you get to the root problem and willing to talk about the root problem, and it is the weakness out of the Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris types, unless you get to the bottom of that, you're never getting to the bottom of Iran, China, or Ukraine. That's the root of the issue, that we need to be stronger on sanctions, stronger diplomatically. You got a whole diplomatic corps sitting on their hands doing nothing but waiting for these folks to invade another country. We need to be stronger overseas and not just continue to send money. I yield.
Thank you. Rebuttal from John.
the curious thing about that position, Nick, is that your chosen presidential candidate stands for weakness and coddling autocrats and has a long record of doing so. And that's the fundamental problem. You didn't speak up during those 6 months when Ukraine was twisting in the wind. You voted for the bill, and you, by the way, always said, oh, look at all the Ukraine funding added in the border bill. By the way, you know what else was in that border bill? The Afghan Adjustment Act, which is the right thing to do by our allies in Afghanistan in the wake of that disaster. But look, Donald Trump represents weakness in the face of Russian aggression and in the face of autocrats everywhere. Donald Trump flip-flopped his position on TikTok once he got a $400 million donation. He is not standing strong against our foreign adversaries and autocrats, and you back him wholeheartedly. You brag you're the first Purple District representative to support him. So that's the real legacy of weakness and autocratic emboldening. What we need is broad bipartisan strong national security tradition. And that's why his own military leaders are warning he is a danger to our democracy and to our allies. That's the reality in their words.
Thank you. Nick?
16 of 31 NATO nations don't do their fair share. I often hear my Democrat friends talk about doing their fair share. 16 of 31 NATO nations don't do their 2% target, their investment of their own GDP into their own defense. That is a green light to Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. Trump stood for the premise of NATO needs to do more. We spend 3.5% of our own nation's GDP. We got the strongest military in the world, damn proud of it. But we can't be relied upon to continue to be the world's cop on everything. Those 16 nations need to do more, and a stronger diplomatic corps by a stronger Secretary of State, a stronger Commander-in-Chief would get it done. That's the root of the issue. And until you address all of that, don't talk about just continuing to send our taxpayer money overseas. You got to get to the root of the problem. NATO needs to be stronger. We need to require each of those nations to do more.
Thank you. Okay, Nick, you will be the first to answer the next question. Since the attack of Hamas on Israel last October 7th, not only has Israel retaliated against Hamas in Gaza, but also Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there have been concerns about an even wider conflict. How do you believe the United States should navigate between support for Israel's right to defend itself and concern for the humanitarian crises in Gaza and Lebanon? What stance do you believe the United States should take in resolving this conflict?
Israel is America's strongest ally, and America is Israel's strongest ally. All of us should be able to say that out loud and believe it from our core because of two main reasons. The same folks who want to wipe Israel off of the map are the same ones who want death to America. And God bless, both of our nations were born upon the concept of religious freedom, that your government would protect you whether you wanted to practice any religion or no religion at all. You were safe in your own home country. These are things that unite the United States and Israel forever. And every one of us who are in Washington or seek to go to Washington should be able to say that and vote and speak accordingly. But the same thing with Ukraine. The weakness invites aggression. When Barack Obama gave $1.7 billion in a pallet of cash to the Iranians, when they were almost bankrupt, refunded and refueled that war machine, and they used their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, to attack our best friend Israel. Iran is the root of the issue, and until we have stronger diplomats and a commander-in-chief, this cycle will continue to perpetuate itself. When Biden said he was going to throttle the weapons that Congress approved to send to Israel, it was another green light for Iran and her proxies to continue to do what they do. That multiple Democrat administrations have allowed the Iranians to enrich their uranium at the potential behest of the Israelis is a terrible, terrible decision that has been made, one that's been never spoken out against by my opponent. The Democrat Party in Washington, unfortunately, has lost its mind on Israel. There used to be a strong bipartisanship when it came to sticking with our best friend, Israel. I made two trips overseas in Congress. The first one was to celebrate Israel's 75th anniversary. Proud to do it, proud to stand with Israel at this time. I wish that both parties were unequivocal in its support of Israel.
John?
I deeply believe we need strong bipartisan support for Israel, and my opponent has heard me speak out on this together at Run for Their Lives. I think October 7th was a horrific terrorist attack. And as I previously explained, as someone who lived through 9/11 up close, I take a very strong stand against terror. I believe we stand up with the victims of terrorism and never blame the victims of terrorism. And I have condemned consistently the outpouring of anti-Semitism and blame Israel instincts that we saw in some protests. I believe that we have a special responsibility, especially folks who happen not to be Jewish, to stand up to condemn anti-Semitism and to stand with the state of Israel. And of course, Iran is a proxy funder of Hamas and Hezbollah. And I shed no tears when terrorists die. The purpose of American foreign policy is to stand with our fellow democracies and combat tyrants and terrorists. I also think, as someone from the 9/11 generation, that we need to be mindful that we're not creating the next generation of terrorists, but we need to stand with our allies, and groups like Hamas have no legitimacy. And we've seen that lack of legitimacy even going back to when Bill Clinton was negotiating with Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat and couldn't get to yes, because that has not been in their interest. We need to make sure we have moved towards ultimately a two-state solution with a demilitarized Palestinian state. We need the complete eradication of Hamas and other terrorist organizations in the region. We need to rebuild Gaza with an expanded Abraham Accords. And we need to make sure we're condemning and combating anti-Semitism at home, as well as those who would blame our Muslim friends and neighbors, because we need to reunite. We need to focus on combating that evil, but we say so with clear moral clarity. And I believe strongly that there needs to be broad bipartisan support to the state of Israel. And I'm proud to have spoken with the parents of Umar Nutra. And we need to keep the hostages in mind, because I don't believe there can be a sustainable ceasefire until all the hostages are released.
Thank you. All right, let's go on to the next question. And John, you will be the first to answer this one. The cost of living is a concern to many of our citizens. What legislation would you support to alleviate the economic pressure on middle and low-income families? Would you support, for example, such initiatives as tax credits for low-income parents, government aid to cover childcare expenses, or help in purchasing a home?
Sure. This is one of the key issues. We need to make Long Island affordable again, but the frustration people feel with the affordability crisis is the result of the middle-class squeeze that's been going on for decades. And I think we need to make sure we are showing that American democracy can deliver for working families again. And there are concrete things we can do to do just that. I think chief among them, first, is making sure that we restore the state and local tax deduction that Trump and the Republicans took away. They did it as part of a political stunt. They did it out of spite. And this is an issue of fairness, because not only it's existed and been in place for 100 years, but New York gives more to the federal government than we get back. And this election is the most consequential of our lifetime for your wallets for that very reason. My opponent talks a lot about trying to restore SALT. The fact is that his own party has told him it's not going to happen under their watch. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee said it's not going to happen. But if Democrats take control, we're going to get it back. That's a clear priority. And I appreciate my opponent using like props and gimmicks, but it doesn't distract from the underlying facts that it's gone if they stay in power, and Democrats will get that back. And that's an average of $10,000 back in your pocket per year. What would you do with that money? But we can do more. As you said, we can expand the child tax credit. We did it for 1 year during the pandemic. We cut child poverty in half. We can do it again if we restore it. That's together real. That is game changing. $10,000 state and local tax deduction on average, and $6,600 for families with young children. And then we need to take action on dealing with the affordability crisis with housing. We've seen prices go up 87% here on Long Island, but we've only built 2% more housing. That's not government's job, but we can create incentives in conjunction with communities to preserve open spaces, the historic character of our communities, while encouraging the development of places, particularly prioritizing housing that's affordable for cops, firefighters, teachers, and nurses.
Thank you. Nick? Nick, you're muted, please.
Yes to a first-time home buyer tax credit. Yes to a low-income home buyer tax credit. Yes to more SALT. I'm going to get to SALT in a second, but again, you got to understand the root of the problem, Mr. Avalon, and you fail to do so once again. The root of the problem here in New York State, and specifically in New York suburbs, and I know you're not that familiar with the New York suburbs, the root of the problem is high property income and sales taxes, the worst taxes of any state in the nation. And that is a result of one-party rule in Albany. Democrats, your friend Kathy Hochul, who's supporting your campaign, buying your field offices, buying your canvassers, busing your folks from Queens and everywhere else, making sure they're knocking on your doors. Nevertheless, The one-party rule in New York State is the cause of so many people having to leave here for the Carolinas and Florida and everywhere else. And yes, the federal government should help out with those tax programs, but we have to get to the root of the issue is your friends, Albany Democrats, keep on spending and spending and spending and giving us tough regulations and taxing us more and more. And until we get to that, we're never going to solve the problem that New York has. We have the dubious distinction of having the highest taxes in the nation, but also we lead the nation out of state migration. More people leave New York than any other nation. But I'll tell you this, SALT should not have been capped. That 2017 tax bill would have voted against it. I'm upset with members of my party who did that. Yet members of your party, when they had control of everything, House, Senate, White House, in 21 and 22, though they beat the drum saying they were all for SALT, squadoosh, nothing. They didn't do anything for us on SALT. And yet when Republicans had the House, me, Garbarino, and D'Esposito negotiated like hell to get a bill towards the floor. And on February 14th of 2024, I think it's HRES 993, go Google it. 18 Republicans blocked it. I was upset with that, but 207 House Democrats blocked that bill from coming to the floor. Don't say poison pill. There was a no law, there was a no budget, a no policy thing that merely criticized Biden's energy policies, worthy of criticism. Your party blocked that bill, but I'm going to continue to move forward.
Nick, just
A rebuttal, John?
rebuttal, yes. Nick, just admit it. You failed. You failed to restore SALT because your party doesn't want to do it. You can't even get that bill passed on the floor. And it's not there was a poison pill attached to it. But the real larger issue is that until those Trump tax laws are set to expire in 2025, no one that doesn't have 60 votes in the Senate is going to be able to get the state and local tax deduction passed that your party and your chosen president took away from us. They raised our taxes. Newsday just did a detailed analysis. And here in Suffolk County, we had our taxes raised because of the taking away the state and local tax deduction. So you failed to get it done, but we'll be in a position to negotiate come 2025. And it's absolutely critical. So don't try to deflect and place blame. Just say, look, you talked a lot about it. You failed to get it done because your party's told you to go pound sand. They've told you it's never going to happen under their watch. They've told you that. I know it's hard to hear, but that's the reality. So let's get it done.
Nick?
For the folks at home, you don't have to believe me. You definitely shouldn't believe Mr. Avalon. Just go Google it. February 14th, 2024, every House Democrat voted to block the bill. Despite Avalon keep on saying, oh, if you give Democrats the power, we're going to restore SALT. Didn't do it in 21 or 22 when you had everything. House, Senate, and the White House.
25.
Couldn't even get 10 of you guys, couldn't get one of you guys to vote when you could have crossed the aisle. And that, by the way, terrible position, Mr. Avalon. What you should be saying right now is, you know what, some folks in my party, the Democrats, they were cowards. I would have crossed the aisle that day. It was wrong what they did. That would be the strong Long Island position. That would be the position to say, you know what, every now and then my party's wrong, but I'm willing to cross the aisle and do what's right for Long Islanders. That's the right position. Going into this like DC circular, oh no, blah, blah. That's wrong. February 14th, 2024, you were on CNN. You should have called out all those Democrats. But I tell you what, on your property taxes, you claim Manhattan is your primary residence for which you get tens of thousands of dollars in tax returns. It's no wonder you're bad on property taxes, sir.
Nick.
Okay, on the next question, Nick, you're going to go first.
Do I get to rebut that rebuttal?
You already made a rebuttal.
All right. Well, we'll get back to that. I look forward to it.
Okay. Nick, you're the first on the next question. What actions would you support to reduce the increasing number of school shootings and mass killings in the United States? What is your position on banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines?
Serious issue. For those who don't know, my wife is a public school teacher, and my 3 kids go to school here on Long Island. And this is a serious issue worthy of bipartisan support. The extremes have dominated this debate for too long. We can make significant consensus and progress on this. First of which is a ban on automatic weapons, a ban on bump stocks. I think that should be something that common sense folks should agree upon. Moreover, I think mental health is something upon which we should continue to focus. And to continue. These school shooters seem to have the same profile time and again. And I think that if we analyze more the mental health aspect, we'll be able to get better to the root of this. Kudos to the school districts who want to do more on this. I would join when a school district wants it, elected by a school board who decides on behalf of the individuals in that district, where a school board wants to make a school a harder target, less penetrable by these evil monsters who continue to try to target our children. I would support sending more federal funds to those schools who want to keep their kids safe. It's a serious issue that should really require bipartisan support.
Thank you. John?
We're in danger of getting numb to this danger. It is a constant threat. We've had 35 mass school shootings. We had one in Georgia just a few weeks ago, and it's already receded from memory. Days after I got in this race, I got a call from Michael and Linda Schulman. They lost their son Scott in the Parkland massacre. And they said they were strong supporters and they wanted to work together on issues of gun safety and violence prevention. And this is an area, one more area where we're far more united than we are divided. But we've seen extremes disproportionately dominate the debates and stop common sense legislation from passing. It's been illegal to even have the CDC research the impact of guns. It seems like a lost era where Ronald Reagan himself helped negotiate or helped lobby for the assault weapons ban, saying that you don't need a weapon of war for hunting or sport or self-defense. And the Republican Party has blocked steps in this. We've made incremental progress. Red flag laws are a good step, but it is sickening to see kids being sold bulletproof gear to line their backpacks. We don't need to be the only nation in the world where this happens. We have 80% support for violent history background checks, and yet the special interests continually block it. And I think that is not the right way to move forward. My opponents even said in the past we should lower the age to buy AR-15s here in New York. And that just makes no common sense to me. There is a lot of common ground we can build on, and we need to do it with a determined sense, recognizing that we are raising a generation of kids to live in fear, and we don't need to be the only nation in this world where it happens on the regular basis. And yes, we do have a Second Amendment, and we can make sure we're making progress consistent with that Second Amendment. That's what I believe deeply.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next question. And John, you will be the first to answer this one. There are those who believe that China is the foreign nation that poses the greatest threat to the United States. Do you see our relationship with China as a concern? And what would you see as a positive relationship going forward?
Absolutely. China is a concern. It is an autocratic power, an expansionist autocratic power, and we see their efforts in insinuating themselves even in the US. And one of the things I was so shocked by is that Donald Trump flipped his position. My opponent's chosen candidate flipped his position on banning TikTok when he got a campaign donation from someone on the board of ByteDance, right? I think we need to put principles over party. We need to be consistent. I don't think we would have let the Soviet Union own a newspaper chain or a radio chain during the Cold War. And I think that's analogous to TikTok's impact now in fueling digital disinformation and undermining our ability to reason together. And we see that in a million different ways. China is trying to be a hegemonic power, and it is part of an autocratic alliance in the world that we as democracies need to stand up against, which is why it's so troubling that my opponent's endorsed candidate for president keeps sending yellow lights on Taiwan in this case, which is unbelievable but true. They've been basically emboldening the autocrats because he seems to have a fascination with autocrats, according to his own military leaders who were warning us about this. So I do think that we need to stand strong against the CCP with the people of China. We need to make sure that Taiwan is protected. We need to make sure we're not being infiltrated in ways that compromise our independence as a nation. Ultimately, we would like to get back to a commercial relationship. It's healthy that we're reshoring and offshoring essential manufacturing. The CHIPS Act was a very smart, long-sighted move. We would like to get to a place where we can have a global competition, but it requires countries that play by the rules of international law. And China has not done that in recent years. I think there's an emerging bipartisan consensus. We need to take that threat seriously, and I do.
Thank you. Nick?
China's beating our lunch on a couple of different things. They're stealing our intellectual property. They're flying their spy balloons across us, and this administration doesn't seem to care. Worse, Mr. Avalon, while he was on CNN the last 6 years, didn't say boo about it whatsoever. That was an embarrassing moment when the Chinese flew their spy balloon across our country, and President Biden just looked the other way, wait till it got to the Carolinas, and then shot it down afterwards. That was a sign of American weakness. I deployed 3 times to the Western Pacific, Philippines, Thailand, Brunei, China, Southern China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, the whole region. Very familiar with that area. China has been allowed to become emboldened. They continue to harass shipping in that area. They're picking apart the Filipino Coast Guard routinely. They've seized islands like the Spratlys, and the administration just looked the other way. And journalists, I'll put that in quotes here, don't say anything. The folks in CNN specific, I won't say them all. There's some decent journalists over there. But the one against whom I'm running has covered for that party for way too long, for 6 years, didn't say boo. He calls Republicans delusional, Trump supporters insane. Every answer he has goes back to Trump. Trump hasn't been the president the last 4 years, so you can't blame him on this, sir. Nevertheless, you had a responsibility. If you're going to invoke that you were a journalist on that network for so long, you had a responsibility to call out President Biden, whose family took a lot of money from China. We all know that. But you didn't call that out. You don't call the weakness out. You don't call the weakness out over Ukraine area, over Iran, over Russia. Anything that you want to say is wrong. It's all about Trump to you. I think that's wrong. If you're going to advertise that somehow you're some sort of centrist, then maybe you are 20 years ago when you wrote a book. Maybe you are 20 years ago when you worked for a Republican mayor. But the last 6 years of your life have stood for nothing other than hyper-partisanship and a one-way look on the world that doesn't fly here on Long Island. Maybe it does on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Not here, though, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a rebuttal,
You
John.
sure do. Nick, before making these accusations, you should actually be familiar with what I've done, and I can direct you to several detailed investigations I did about China's expansionist power, including a detailed examination of how the Chinese government was using police stations overseas, including in the United States, as a way of enforcing their own laws against citizens living in other nations and against former Chinese citizens living in other nations. So, and that is one of many examples of where I have written and done reporting that is very, aggressive to China's expansionist threat. So those sorts of accusations you're making are just further undermine your already incredibly diminished credibility in your attempt to paint with a broad brush. In fact, I looked back the other day and actually the RNC tweeted out one of my own reality checks because I was criticizing Democrats. So, this is just a narrative you're trying to impose, and doesn't fit the facts, which is sadly not surprising for someone of your stature.
Thank you, Nick.
House Republicans passed numerous bills this cycle, which Democrats would not have passed, but House Republicans passed those bills numerous times this year to do things like confront Chinese aggression, to protect our intellectual property, to criticize things like them using what is essentially slave labor over there. You know who never said anything to say that was a good idea? Mr. Avalon and CNN. For 6 years, one of the biggest stages in national politics, could speak about whatever he wanted for 5 minutes a day, once a week for 6 years. Never said anything complimentary of a Republican policy. Now, I think he would tell you even a broken clock is right twice a day, but never one thing complimentary of Republicans. And now he's feigning in the district that he'd be this swell, centrist kind of guy, when for the last 6 years, it's been the most vitriolic, partisan rhetoric that has been part of the divide of this great nation. A lot of things to blame, but those cable news stations with their vitriolic partisan anchors like Mr. Avalon are dividing the heck out of us just to sell more ad space to corporate media. And now he's out here saying that he's some sort of centrist. Long Islanders ain't believing it, sir.
Okay, thank you. And Nick, you are going to be the next, have the next question. First answer to the next question. What is your position on whether there should be a plan to citizenship for the Dreamers, and also for undocumented persons productively working and paying taxes in the United States for many years?
We have a tremendous immigration issue right now, and there's going to be a fire drill if administrations change. There's, by the way, no estimates are really reliable. Some say 6, some say 20 million. It's probably somewhere in between of that number of illegal people in this country. Yes, I have some sympathy for the Dreamers. If you were brought here by somebody else before you were the age of majority, you weren't making decisions for yourself, I got a tremendous amount of sympathy for you, especially if you have lawfully integrated you into our society and you being productive. God bless, there should be a spot for a person like that in our world. However, what the other party fails to recognize is the fire drill that we will have to tackle. that there are millions of people who are here. And by the way, I'll post some stats on my website afterwards or on my social media, committing violent crimes, assaults, batteries, rapes, murders, everything in between. The numbers are off of the charts because President Biden is not vetting in the people who are coming across our southern border. The bill that my opponent hasn't read but somehow supports doesn't address any of that whatsoever, doesn't address any vetting whatsoever. And this is the unfortunate reality of the politics in which we live. We're going to have to deport some people. Some people, it's going to be cheaper to deport them than support them. If you're here committing violent crimes, you should be gone. If you're here to mooch off the system, to use our tax dollars to get the free hotels and healthcare, you should be gone. There's going to be a fire drill if administrations change to ensure that we re-secure our border, that we have accountability. Kamala Harris said that she wants to decriminalize the illegal crossing of the border and make it a mere civil offense. That's a step in the wrong direction. And yes, Mr. Avalon, of course, supports Kamala Harris. That is a step in the wrong direction. We need to be able to address that. At the same time, we've had immigration quotas that match our labor needs. We need good legal immigration, and the parties should work together on that. But what has happened in the last 3.5 years is totally abhorrent. It's ruined our safety and it's ruined our economy. We need to do better.
Thank you. Are those hands up or?
I haven't had a chance to answer the question, but I think that's from the last time.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. This is going to be the last question.
Man, I didn't get a chance to answer that.
Oh, I'll answer it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You'll notice my opponent didn't actually answer your question. Obviously, people who commit crimes should be deported. That's basic. But the question is what to do with the dreamers. And it's one thing to say your heart goes out, but it's another thing to say it's going to be a fire drill when there's a change of government. You know, his chosen candidate has called for not just mass deportations now, but armed mass deportations now. I'd like to know how that works. You know, I think we need more legal immigration to America. We need less illegal immigration. You know, the details of the border security bill, which Kamala Harris said she'd pass, which when it comes to asylum claims, for example, we need to change fundamentally. There's no such thing as economic asylum, and it shouldn't be incentive for people to show up. Those are the kinds of things that were in the bill that my opponent previously said on Bill Rither weren't even dealt with. So, but this, when it comes to dealing with the dreamers, I've interviewed dreamers. We have put these people in limbo. It is not the right thing to do. It's one more reason we need comprehensive immigration reform, because these dreamers, many of whom are, most of whom are active, productive citizens in our society, are being squeezed. And to simply express sympathy and not say what you do is totally inappropriate. And more importantly, I want to know how that fire drill looks if we have armed mass deportations, as your candidate has suggested. We need to have strong border controls. We need to have comprehensive immigration reform that deals with the economic aspects of immigration, that deals with a pathway for the dreamers. But we do need to restore faith that our immigration system works. But deal with the practicality, deal with the decency, deal with the human cost of this fire drill you speak of. How do you imagine armed mass deportations working under your chosen president, Nick? Is that what you want? Is that sympathy?
Will the gentleman yield?
Spoke for? No, I'll yield. My time's up, and it just about is. But I want you to actually answer the question of how, as a practical matter, you see that happening, consistent with anything resembling American values. We need a strong border, but let's not have armed mass deportations unless you're embracing that, which you very well might.
Thank you. Nick, are you?
I'm going to speak for 30 seconds. I'm going to yield back to Mr. Avalon to ask a question to him. You talk about urgency in government routinely, Mr. Avalon. You invoke Ukraine on that, but you say nothing about the border. You talk about the urgency of how are we going to treat all these folks who are here illegally. What about the Americans who are dying? What about the 222,000 Americans dead from fentanyl? What about the 325,000 lost migrant children in our border under Joe Biden? What about the $5 billion of tax money that have to go into New York for free hotels and healthcare and lawyers for migrants? And my question to you, sir, is, have you read it yet? 4 days ago, you said you didn't read the bill. My question to you, the bill that you support, the bill that you said is going to fix all this. My question to you with the last 20 seconds I have is, have you read it yet?
You, sir, are a sad excuse and part of the reason that Long Island's delegation is a laughing stock. Look, we have to fix our border. You had a bipartisan chance to do it. You rejected it because Donald Trump told you to. Why? Because you're a follower. not a leader. You're not actually serious about bipartisanship. You have the least bipartisan record of any member of the Long Island delegation. That's a fact. So we need to fix.
Please put down the,
Yeah, this is
Nick,
just
please
childish,
put
man, but
down.
I'm surprised coming from you. And when it comes to fentanyl, I know you're unfamiliar with the work I've done as a journalist and a writer, but I've co-authored an op-ed over the course of this campaign with a man named Kamal Barwani, whose son died of a fentanyl poisoning. We've had 20 times more fentanyl deaths here in Suffolk County than homicides in 2023. And that bipartisan border bill you continue to mock would have added new technology to stop that flow. So that's on your watch as a member of Congress, sir. So let's deal with that. That is a generation being wiped out. And I take great offense at that. We need to take massive action at that. We are losing a generation to fentanyl poisonings, and it's unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. We have one last question and then the closing statements. And John, you will answer this question first.
Great.
What are the issues that you feel are of most concern to the residents of our congressional district? What federal funding will you try to obtain for our district? And how will you keep yourself apprised of the wishes and needs of the residents of our district?
Such an important question. I mean, first of all, I've committed to monthly meetings with labor and law enforcement because you need to have that kind of open door policy. I've committed to doing 12 open in-person town halls a year. My opponent has done no open in-person town halls. I think that's part of the job of a congressman, is to be a representative, which requires listening. It requires learning. It requires meeting in person. On deliverables, I think we need to restore the state and local tax deduction to deal with the affordability crisis and expand the child tax credit. I think we need to defend reproductive freedom, something my opponent does not believe and has said repeatedly he would vote for a second and third trimester abortion ban. In addition, we need to make sure we are working.
Please, we don't want the signs up, Nick.
Border security, because that's the only way you can get something passed with this filibuster at 60 votes in the Senate. Those are the things we can deliver on. Then we can do more. We can make sure we're dealing with climate change. My opponent said he wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes prescription drug caps for seniors. We need to make sure we're investing in climate change mitigation. We need to make it tax deductible for you to make your property and small businesses property more resilient. We need to make sure we're doing more on that front. And then we need to make sure we're leaning into climate change innovation to create new clean energy technologies between the work being done at Brookhaven National Labs and Stony Brook. This, and with Discovery Park, there's a great new era of economic opportunity if we lean in to being an engine of innovation and deal with climate change, innovating our way out of this problem, as well as climate change mitigation. There are things we need to do, but we need to focus on delivering for working people, actually rebuilding the middle of our politics and our economy, and really delivering. And my opponent will vote for a continuing resolution that cuts the federal government by 20%, because that's what his party does. And we need to actually get serious about working together again. That's the promise of this election.
Thank you, Nick. You're muted, Nick.
We're a nation $36 trillion in debt, a debt to GDP ratio worse than since World War II. And yeah, we're going to have to cut somewhere, Mr. Avalon. Hopefully that could be a bipartisan endeavor moving forward. While we do so, we should protect, as we have, Social Security and Medicare and VA and Homeland and defense spending. Those are the things that we should protect, but everything else ought to be on the table. And I don't think that should be a one-party issue. This nation hasn't balanced the budget in 25 years. And if we continue down this path, we're going to have more inflation, which is the hidden tax. We're going to deny future generations of Americans the awesome opportunities our parents were able to pass off to us. I want to pass a better economy, a better planet, more opportunity to my kids than my parents were able to pass off to us. That's the American dream, sir. So yeah, don't vilify some spending cuts here and there, especially when they protect those issues in particular. We did pass a debt ceiling hike. We'll concurrently cut $1.7 trillion in spending over 10 years. A start. We need to do more. We need to be serious about our belt tightening. And for you to vilify that is just wrong and out of touch. It is the inflation is the hidden tax. Overspending leads to inflation. You don't get that, you're running for the wrong job. But I tell you what, while in this job, I brought home $150 million federal dollars to this district, money for jobs, money for the environment, money for infrastructure, all 8 towns. I didn't care if it was a Democrat mayor, Democrat supervisor, or Republican who asked me for money. I went out and got it. Every town got something to help water quality, infrastructure, millions of dollars. Even got some to your summer home in Sag Harbor. Sorry, I couldn't get any in Manhattan where you actually live. Maybe you should ask Jerry Nadler about that. Nevertheless, Bringing home the bacon is important to me. I've done it, 150 million. I'll do more in a second term.
Thank you both. We're now going to go to the closing statements. And John Avlon will go first on the closing statement.
Just 1 minute.
Yes.
This is a time for choosing, and the stakes couldn't be higher for our country and our community. My opponent pretends to be moderate, but has also bragged that he was the first Purple District representative to endorse Donald Trump. This election is about common ground over chaos, and the chaos that Donald Trump represents and the empowering of extremes that Nick LaLota represents is not represent Suffolk County values. We need to practice the politics of addition and not division. My opponent has broken promise after promise. He promised he'd move to the district if he had the honor of representing the voters here, and he never did. He had promised he would fix the border. He didn't fix the border. He didn't pass that bipartisan border security bill. He is actually opposed to abortions in the second and third trimester. That's a 12-week abortion ban. He is the least bipartisan member of the Long Island delegation. It's time to turn the page. It's time to actually restore common sense problem solving to Congress. And Nick LaLota is the problem, not the solution, because he's a follower, not a leader.
Thank you. Nick?
The United States of America is the greatest nation the world has ever known, but like most of my constituents, I think America is heading in the wrong direction. The crisis at our southern border, which President Biden created when he repealed with a stroke of a pen 64 very effective Trump-era policies, had led to chaos at the border. Moreover, the cost of everything from groceries to housing is unsustainable. More and more Long Islanders living paycheck to paycheck and putting more and more of their bills on their credit cards. I'm endorsed by a lot, by a bunch of blue-collar labor unions, by law enforcement unions, by a lot of blue-collar people who go to work every day just trying to live the struggle, and they want somebody who will fight for them. Bill Parcells said, "You are what your record is." I'm more bipartisan than 85% of members of Congress. I passed more bills than 95% of Congress. I brought home $150 million to the district, and I'm just getting warmed up. Vote for me in November, and I'll keep on delivering. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both candidates for their informative and thought-provoking responses, and to thank all of those viewing the debate for joining us. Most importantly, don't forget to vote. You may vote at your usual voting site on Election Day, November 5th, or at any early voting site in Suffolk County from October 26th through November 3rd. Thank you.